Hello everyone, welcome. Be with you in a second. So, I always have trouble turning that little stream music off, so I'm here finally after I pushed and pushed and pushed and it finally went off. I'm here to greet you. I'm glad you're here with me for the next episode of the More Than Laissez-Faire audiobook. So I'm going to get started here. Thank you so much for coming. I want to welcome you to this Divine Economy Theory fireside and thank you for taking your time to be here with me because I know that your time is precious. This Facebook Live series serves as an audiobook and as an archival resource since I am the author and originator of the Divine Economy Theory and I am the one reading the book. This Facebook Live series is also a love story. It's a story about love of the Divine Economy Theory, the love of freedom, the love of peace and prosperity, and the love of voluntary social cooperation. So let's get started. Today's fireside is Chapter 4, Part 2, and the title of Chapter 2 is Real World Economic Principles. This is a fascinating chapter for many reasons. It places all economic concepts and principles into the model, and it uses production possibilities frontiers to visually show how that concept works in the economy. I broke this chapter up into 4 episodes. I'll show you what I mean by that. Here's the big picture. So there's the Divine Economy model with the 4 quadrants. And last time we covered the quadrant human spirit order. And this time we're going to cover the quadrant order transformation. And those are the economic concepts and principles that are in that quadrant. This will give you a picture of that. So there we're going to look at these economic concepts, starting at division of labor and ending with disequilibrium. So what we'll do now is we'll go back to here. And so if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box of this Facebook Live page, or you can email me. So we'll go ahead and see if anybody's here. Oopsie, there we go, right there. Oh my gosh, I'm in the wrong place. Okay, there we go. Is anybody here? Nobody's here, okay. So one of the next things that we're going to do is look at this information that's on the page itself. It has the title of the talk of today's episode. It lists the different concepts and principles that we're going to be looking at, and then it also gives you some links. It gives you a link to More Than Laissez-Faire on Amazon. It gives you a link that if you want, you can be notified by email when the Facebook Live goes live. It gives you a link to a free workbook PDF that accompanies the diagrams that we go through in the book, and it also gives you a link to my YouTube channel, and then there are the 2 email addresses that you can contact me if you have any questions. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll go back to the agenda, and then we'll go to the next step, which is actually going directly to the audio book, and that's right here. So here we go. We're going to get started. This is the second part of Chapter 4. Real-world economic principles in the order transformation quadrant. Well, let's see. Why is that not? Oh, I know what. There we go. Okay. So, real-world economic principles in the order transformation quadrant. I've chosen 9 economic principles for placement in this quadrant. These are the principles that find expression in and emerge from both the market and its capital structure. It is through the instrumentality of capital that the order of the market undergoes transformation. Equally symmetric and reciprocal is the vital need for the dynamic flow of information from within the market process so that capital can exist and its structure can serve everyone's needs. See diagram 4F. So here is a picture of the quadrant. Diagram 4F is the economic principles that are in the order transformation quadrant. And so there they are. And these are the ones that we're going to go and talk about. So now we'll go to the highlighted portions of this paragraph. This section is called Real-World Economic Principles in the Order Transformation Quadrant. There's 9 economic principles, and the reason they were chosen is because they emerge from both the market and its capital structure. And it's through this instrumentality of capital that the order of the market undergoes transformation. And so there is a dynamic flow of information within the market process, and that enables capital to exist and for its structure to serve everyone's needs. And so we're going to look, that's basically why these principles and concepts were put into this quadrant. Now this is the quadrant. These are the economic principles in the order transformation quadrant. So here's your order and your transformation axes of this quadrant, and then the principles and concepts that were selected to go into this quadrant was division of labor, medium of exchange, time preference, pure rate of interest, savings, monetary theory, entrepreneurship, risk, and disequilibrium. And so that is what we're going to do next, is we're going to go back and we're going to the next section. But I want to show you something first, and that's going back to this point here. So here we are. This is chapter 4, Real World Economic Principles. We're looking at the order transformation quadrant. And so the divine economy model has the ability to encapsulate all the economic concepts and principles that there are, and it's like a canopy of principles. And so the ones that are in this quadrant are these that I just listed: division of labor, medium of exchange, all the way down to disequilibrium. And this information is in the book called More Than Laissez-Faire. It's a macroeconomics alternative textbook. And if you'll notice, we're going to get started. So the very first one that we're going to cover, if you look at this list, is division of labor. So that's where we are. We're going to now go look at the division of labor, and that will be going here. Okay, so division of labor, first paragraph. Without necessarily recognizing the concept of division of labor, humans have operated according to this universal law. Praxeology, which can be defined as action logic, identified division of labor as a universal law of human action. And so the highlights for that paragraph, first of all, it's the new section called Division of Labor, and it introduces this concept of praxeology, which is action logic. And that action logic is what helps us to identify division of labor as a universal law of human action. So the second paragraph, the moment a choice was made for the sake of efficiency, there was division of labor, no matter how primitive the historical culture. It is difficult to imagine even an early stage in the history of mankind when some degree of this law did not operate. It is as old as humanity itself, and it is inseparable from humans. So we'll look at the highlights. Anytime a choice is made for the sake of efficiency, you have division of labor. And that's always occurred in the history of humankind. So it's as old as humanity of itself, and it is inseparable from humans. These steps of efficiency and this production of wealth, this division of labor, is essentially the beginning of capital. Therefore, it is a misconception to separate capital and labor, since they are intricately interwoven, peas of the same pod, and variations on the same theme. Okay, so we're on the summary of that, or some of the highlights for that paragraph is there's steps of efficiency that lead to production of wealth, and that is division of labor. And basically when that is occurring, that's the beginning of capital. And so there is this misconception out there about capital and labor, but they are intricately interwoven, and they're peas of the same pod. And that's an important concept to understand if you want to understand economics. So division of labor is expressed in the market as a type of social cooperation that comes from specialization, physical and intellectual specialization. The idea that the market process is quietly consultative in nature, which is a very high form of cooperation, implies that there is an intellectual division of labor. In other words, specialization contained in the wisdom of each of the market process participants. The increased wealth that results from division of labor provides incentive for such specialization. So we'll look at that highlights of that paragraph. This division of labor is expressed in the market. It's a type of social cooperation that comes from specialization, either physical or intellectual specialization. The market process is quietly consultative, which is a very high form of cooperation. And this implies that there's intellectual division of labor, which is this specialization contained in the wisdom of each of the market process participants. The increased wealth that results from division of labor provides incentive for such specialization. So it's not happening just randomly. Because it leads to increased wealth, there is division of labor, and it's a type of specialization that leads to an increase in wealth. So the existence of the division of labor indicates that there is a desire for more goods in the economy. Division of labor brings capital into existence, provides for diverse wisdom to enter the consultative market process, and it generates wealth, which provides incentive for even more division of labor. It is an act of social cooperation. Mises concurs. In a hypothetical world in which the division of labor would not increase productivity, there would not be any society. There would not be any sentiments of benevolence and goodwill. So here are the highlights for that paragraph. The existence of the division of labor indicates that there's a desire for more goods in the economy. In division of labor, it brings capital into existence. It provides for diverse wisdom to enter into the consultative process. It generates wealth, which leads to even more division of labor. And all this can be seen and understood as it's an act of social cooperation. And if there was such a thing, which it's not reality, but if there was such a hypothetical world where there was no division of labor, there would not be any society. It's that key, it's that foundational, it's that important to understand. So now we're going to go back to this picture here. So we've looked at division of labor. Now we're going to go to the next one in this canopy of principles. We're going to look at the next one, which is medium of exchange. So medium of exchange. As the division of labor continued and the economy evolved, it was discovered that certain goods were basic to human well-being and therefore commonly sought after. Some of these basic goods were relatively less perishable and relatively easier to transport, which made them valuable not only as a commodity, but as a means of indirect exchange. So here are the highlights for this new section, new concept, new principle that's in this quadrant, and it's called the medium of exchange. And so what's happening as this division of labor is going on, started to affect the economy evolves, and certain goods were basic. I mean, that was understood. And they became, because they were basic, they were commonly sought after. And of those goods that were commonly sought after, some of them were relatively less perishable and, at the same time, relatively easier to transport, which made them valuable not only as a commodity, but also as a means of indirect exchange. All over the world, there were a myriad of mediums of exchange that emerged from different cultures. The most universally accepted medium of exchange that naturally emerged from the unhampered market was gold. It so happens, in contrast, that artificial mediums of exchange instituted by the interventionists are highly susceptible to corruption, since they only exist because of a corruption of the natural processes of the divine economy to begin with. So, we're going to go into this paragraph here and look at the highlights. So, over time, across cultures, the most universally accepted medium of exchange ended up being gold. And the interesting thing, the gold has qualities, and so when you compare that to what happened later, was that there were artificial mediums of exchange created by interventionists. And they didn't have some of the qualities that this naturally emerging medium exchange of gold had. And one of the things that they lacked, and one of the things that and the reason they lacked it is because they were highly susceptible to corruption. And we'll get into more of that in a minute. Just as the market historically sifted through the alternative means of exchange and settled on gold, the test of a good medium of exchange is that it serves the economy and leads to further efficiencies. Confidence that it has value that cannot be destroyed makes it an effective economic means of traversing the time element. Overcoming this time element in the economy brings it with it new and wonderful possibilities. So here's the highlights for that paragraph. The test of a good medium of exchange is that it serves the economy and leads to further efficiencies. And that's possible because the value cannot be destroyed, and which means that it can then traverse the time element. Very important. Once a medium of exchange is in place and universally accepted, then all goods and services produced are valued in those terms. This was a major advancement since it made cost accounting possible. Both inputs and the goods and services produced were then in the same terms. From this point forward, it was possible to evaluate and to determine profit and loss. So here are the highlights for that paragraph. So once there's this medium of exchange in place, then all goods and services produced are valued in those terms. And that means that cost accounting is possible. And that was a major revelation, basically, in how the economy worked, because once there's cost accounting, then from that point forward, it was possible to evaluate and determine profit and loss. However, if there is counterfeiting of the medium of exchange of any kind, then the counterfeiters, who have not contributed anything to production, cause the exchange value of the money to decrease. Subsequently, the purchasing power of the money is negatively affected and it falls. The counterfeiters get something for nothing, but the productive members of society are ultimately stolen from. This is true no matter who is the counterfeiter, the guy down the street or the central bank. Additionally, counterfeiting undermines the time element efficiency gains that come from having a perpetually good medium of exchange. So here are the highlights for that paragraph. When there's counterfeiting of the medium of exchange, it causes the exchange value of the money to decrease. And in addition to that, counterfeiting undermines the time element efficiency gains that result from having a good medium of exchange. So that kind of concludes that section, and we're about to move to the next section. And I'll show you what that looks like. And so we've covered division of labor, we've covered medium of exchange. Now we're going to cover time preference. But before we do that, we're going to come back here, and I want to greet you, make sure you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying it so far. I'm going to get a drink. My mouth is getting a little dry. I always have my Ludwig von Mises coffee mug handy and nearby so I can keep my quench my thirst. But also, I think I'm going to take a minute here and see who's here. And to do that, we have to go. Let me see who's here. Okay, let me go here. Okay, so I won't take your time up. That's was nobody here, so that is not something we have to think about right now. Okay, so we are going to go back to the audiobook. And we talked about that we're going to the next section, which is time preference. Okay, so time preference is the praxeological law that explains how humans value time. All humans prefer to have whatever good or service they need now rather than later. They prefer to have the needed good now, so if they have to wait, then a premium is assigned to the good. The present good is equal to the same good in the future plus a premium. So here we are, we're starting a new concept, new principle in that quadrant. It's called time preference, and it's a praxeological law. It explains how humans value time. All humans prefer to have the good now, or good or service now, rather than later. And so if they have to wait, there's a premium assigned to that to the good. And so the present good is equal to the same good in the future plus a premium. Time preference is high or low, but always positive. One way of understanding time preference is to recognize that there is always a cost involved with saving until later rather than consuming in the present. It is either relatively high or relatively low. The higher the time preference, the higher the discounting applied to the future. If people foresee war or fear for the future, they will have a high time preference and will save less. In their eyes, it's more costly to save. We'll look at the highlights. So time preference is always positive. It's either high or low, and that's because there's always a cost involved with saving until later. So the higher the time preference, the higher the discounting applied to the future. Okay? We're going to now go to the next paragraph. If people foresee peace and prosperity on the horizon, they have a relatively low time preference, and we will be more willing to save. A lower time preference has a reciprocal effect. It brings about a higher degree of prosperity. Let us assume that I see good things on the horizon, like peace and trustworthiness. That makes me feel secure and confident about the future. As a result, I will save if I have income greater than my current needs. My savings will then be used to advance prosperity. So here's the final paragraph on time preference. If people foresee peace and prosperity, they're more willing to save, and that has a reciprocal effect. So if if I feel secure and confident about the future, as a result, I'll save. And my savings will then be used to advance prosperity. That's the reciprocal effect. So we're about to go to the next principle and concept. And so we'll go and take a look at it, how it fits into the big picture. We've looked at these three. Now we're at the pure rate of interest. And now we'll go back and take a look at it. So, the pure rate of interest. The premium assigned to future goods relative to the same goods in the present would represent the pure rate of interest at the individual level. The collective expression of this valuation for each culture is the pure rate of interest. The only way to get a sense of this expression of the cultural time preference is in the market, since all real signals are sent within the market. What you will find in the market is the market interest rate, which is the pure rate of interest plus a premium to compensate for the risk incurred over time for the particular endeavor, plus a factor that is often underestimated, which is an attempt to account for the changes in the purchasing power of the money if the money is being corrupted. So we'll look at this paragraph, the highlights of it. So we're in this new section called Pure Rate of Interest. And the premium that's assigned to future goods would be the pure rate of interest for the individual. There's a collective expression of this valuation for each culture, which is also the pure rate of interest. But the only way to get a sense of that is in the market, because that's where all the real signals are sent, and they're sent within the market. So what you find in the market, though, is the market interest rate, which is the pure interest rate plus a premium. And that premium is associated with whatever endeavor that you're working on. There's a risk factor. So there's this premium added to the pure rate of interest. So if you go to look at the market interest rate, it would be the pure interest rate plus this premium for the riskiness of whatever you're in whatever endeavor you're on. Plus, there's a factor that is underestimated most of the time, and it's an attempt to account for the changes in the purchasing power of money because the money is being corrupted. To get a realistic snapshot of the market rate of interest, we look at the demand and supply of loanable funds. The amount of loanable funds available represents the supply side. The demand for loanable funds intersects the supply of loanable funds, determining the market clearing price, which approximates the pure rate of interest. In brief, in an unhampered economy, time preference is a major determinant of the supply of loanable funds, and the demand for these loanable funds by entrepreneurs represents the demand side. See diagram 4G. So, the 4G, the title of this diagram is Market Interest Rate and Loanable Funds in an Unhampered Market Economy. So we have the demand and supply of loanable funds. And there's your market interest rate. And we'll look at the highlights for this paragraph. So for a realistic snapshot of the market rate of interest, we look at the demand and supply of loanable funds. And this, where the demand and the supply intersect, there's a market clearing price which approximates the pure rate of interest. And if there's no interference in the economy, time preference is a major determinant of the supply of loanable funds. And then the demand for the loanable funds is by entrepreneurs is what represents the demand side. So if we look at this diagram, which is the market interest rate and loanable funds in the unhampered market economy, we have the supply of loanable funds, which is determined in an unhampered market by, to a large degree, by the time preference, the cultural time preference. And then we have the demand for loanable funds, which is this demand by the entrepreneurs for loanable funds. And where those intersect, that would give you a market interest rate, which would be an approximation of the pure rate of interest. So that's the end of that section. And we're going to then go to the next one, and I will show you where that fits in. It fits in right here. So we did pure rate of interest. Now we're going to look at savings. So we'll go back and look at savings. Now savings, the time element of the economy causes befuddlement among economists and non-economists alike. Savings is simply the allocation of income over time. Most understand that income is allocated among various goods and services in the present. For example, I spend some of my income on housing, food, clothing, and entertainment, and that is understood. Expanding on this thought, now in addition to these, I also allocate a portion of my income to a time horizon that extends into the future. This is savings. Savings, then, translates in the economy as loanable funds. The befuddled ones miss this point. Okay, so we're going to look at the highlights for this next paragraph. So we're in this next section called savings, and so many, almost all, economists are befuddled by savings, and there's a reason for it, because an ideological reason. But anyways, it's still complete misunderstanding of economics by those who are non-economists and those who claim to be economists. Savings is simply the allocation of income over time. So, of course, everyone would know that income is allocated among different things in the present. Now, in addition to that, we also allocate a portion of income to a time horizon. And savings, then, is that's what savings is. And that translates in the economy as loanable funds. So, that's where we were looking up here, the supply of loanable funds. Okay, that's coming from savings. And that's where that's coming from. So we'll look at the next paragraph. Economic growth is limited by loanable funds. Savings is simply another way of saying loanable funds. It is true that wealthier individuals have a larger portion of their income in absolute and perhaps as a percentage of the total of their income directed into some form of savings. These are the funds that people have willingly made available for use in exchange for a rate of return based on their time preferences. Now, regardless of the current stock of savings and investment, the key to economic development is new and additional savings, which releases new capital for use by entrepreneurs in already established and new productive efforts. This is what is meant by economic growth. So we're going to look at the highlights for that paragraph. Economic growth is limited by loanable funds. Okay, you could see that up in this diagram. If loanable funds is less, then, well, you can't see that in that diagram, but that's you can see the loanable funds, the supply of loanable funds. And so when these funds are willingly made available for use, and they do that for an exchange for in exchange for a rate of return that is, that reflects their time preferences. That's what they're willing to they're willing to put funds into savings at that certain rate based on their time preferences. And when there's new and additional savings, that releases new capital for use by entrepreneurs. And then that is what goes into already established or new productive efforts, and that's what is meant by economic growth. So the market absorbs and conveys information about the present, plus it conveys all of the time element information as perfectly well as is possible. Essentially, the market is in divine order. Okay, so here's a really important point. Where all this is taking place is in the market. It absorbs and conveys the information about the present, plus it conveys all the information about the time element. And it does it as perfectly well as is possible. There's nothing could do it better than that. That's what the market does. And it does it because the market is in divine order, unless it's interfered with. It is one thing for the befuddled ones to miss the point that savings is simply an allocation of income over time, but it is quite another and more sinister thing for the befuddled ones to then impose acts of intervention on the market due to their ignorance of what savings is. An example of this would be lowering interest rates to encourage consumption and discourage savings. This act of interference is done because the interveners regard savings as an absence of consumption rather than as a conscious choice to consume at a later time. Intervention into this part of the economy directed towards reducing savings is extremely disruptive, and it is destructive of capital. So this is the next paragraph, and this is about savings. This will be the last paragraph about savings. And it's trying to make it clear that savings is simply an allocation of income over time. And out of ignorance or whatever other motivations there are behind it, those who impose intervention on the market with regards to savings are actually destructive of capital. And so intervention into this part of the economy where they're trying to discourage savings by lowering interest rates. Because remember we said that up here that people are willing to make their savings available at a rate of return that reflects their time preferences. Well, if they're not going to get a high enough return, they're going to reduce their savings. And if they have reduced their savings, they're going to increase their consumption because you got one or the other. And so the deliberate attempt to do that is basically depriving the economy of loanable funds. And that's extremely disruptive, and it's destructive of capital. So we're going to go now to the next concept and principle is monetary theory. But I think what I want to do here is, well, first of all, we'll go over here and look at this, and then I want you to spend a minute reflecting on what we've learned so far. What is it that you see differently than you saw before? And just think about all those little points that we've talked about so far. And what we're going to do now is we're going to, how do I do that? I'm going to go here and go here. Okay. So we're going to come back here so I can get another drink from my Ludwig von Mises cup. I'm dying of thirst here. Hope you're enjoying the presentation so far on this order transformation quadrant in the divine economy model. And now we'll go back to where we're going next, which is monetary theory. And that should be interesting, I think, for everybody. And so we're going to go there next. So here we go. Monetary theory. Money is a medium of exchange that permits indirect exchange and brings about all the resulting efficiencies. Give consideration to these efficiencies by contrasting them with the awkwardness and impracticability of having to barter each and every time you wish to make an exchange. So here we are. We're going to start a new concept, new principle, monetary theory. And here are the highlights for that first paragraph. Money is a medium of exchange that permits indirect exchange and brings about all the resulting efficiencies. One of the defining and determining qualities used when human societies chose its medium of exchange was the stock of money. Typically, the medium of exchange was neither superabundant nor was it extremely rare. However, once the medium of exchange is adopted in the market, because of its superior qualities and its performance as a medium of exchange, the stock of money is a non-factor. One stock of money is as good as another. If the demand for money increases, it simply causes the value of each unit of money to increase. So here we are. We're going to look at this highlights for this paragraph. One of the defining and determining qualities when the process of choosing a medium of exchange is going on is the stock of money, because the medium of exchange is a commodity that's chosen, but it's not super abundant, nor is it extremely rare. So anyways, that takes place. Those are some of the factors involved in that selection. But once the medium of exchange is adopted, the stock of money is no longer a factor, because the economy works. Demand and supply, all this equilibrium forces that are taking place, it doesn't require anything other than for the economy to work. So if the demand for money increases, it simply causes the value of each unit of money to increase. So you don't have to increase the stock of money. The value changes if the demand changes. So that's an important point to know. Prices of all goods and services are in terms of money, so the relativities expressed in the market are maintained, which means that the market functions as always, conveying information about the relative prices of goods and services. The divine economy equilibrates quickly, and it instantaneously adjusts itself to each market interaction regardless of the stock of money. So that's how the economy works. And it does work. Prices basically it shows these relativities that are expressed in the market. And it's reflected in the prices. And so these relativities are maintained as a result. And this is what's conveying information. The market is what's conveying this information about the relative prices of goods and services. And the divine economy equilibrates quickly and instantaneously adjusts itself. So this stuff is happening all the time, and it's just the prices are changing, and to reflect the relative prices of goods and services. So it has nothing to do with the stock of money. Once the medium of exchange is established and chosen, then the stock of money is irrelevant. Prices just change as a result of the changes in relativities between goods and services, and it's equilibrating instantaneously and quickly in the divine economy. The stock of money circulates in the present and connects the present to the future through savings. Savings represents loanable funds, which becomes capital. Capital is what enables people to get paid now for their present services, even though the end-of-the-line fruit of their work does not make it to the market until sometime in the future. So the highlights for this paragraph is that this stock of money that's circulating connects the present and the future by way of savings. And savings represents loanable funds. And loanable funds become capital. And capital is what pays people now for their present services, even though the fruit of their work does not come to the market until sometime in the future. So there could be, why would anybody be opposed to capital? That's what pays people to be able to be in the production process, So I mean, it's ridiculous to attack capital. Nothing could be produced that wasn't instantaneously on the market if you didn't have capital. The medium of exchange that is chosen in the divine economy due to its merits is universally and voluntarily accepted, partially because it cannot be manipulated artificially. One such example is gold. In other words, no amount of alchemy can create gold out of thin air, which means that there is no such thing as a business cycle in the divine economy. God does not play games with the economy or with mankind. However, the interventionists are playing a monetary game with the economy by manipulating the stock of money. One of the most visible consequences of their intervention is the repeated occurrence of a business cycle. It is the mismanagement of the monetary system by the ego-driven interventionists that causes these business cycles. So our final paragraph in this section on monetary theory is that the medium of exchange that was chosen is chosen because of its merits, that it's universally and voluntarily accepted, and that it can't be manipulated artificially. And that's why something like gold was chosen. No amount of alchemy can create gold out of thin air. And so because of that, there's no such thing as business cycles in the divine economy. But we don't have a divine economy because the interventionists are playing a monetary game. And it's their mismanagement of the monetary system that causes these business cycles. So we're about to go into the next concept and principle, and that's entrepreneurship. So we'll go look at that and see. Entrepreneurship. The spirit of entrepreneurship is uniquely human. It is the quality of being alert to possibilities. It is the driving force in the economy, and it has origins in the disutility of labor. Even though all human beings possess various degrees of capacity for entrepreneurship, most of the time, for most people, it is only a potential, resting in latency. We'll look at the highlights of that paragraph. So we're starting a new section. It's called entrepreneurship, and it's uniquely human. It's the quality of being alert to possibilities. It's the driving force of the economy, and it has origins in the disutility of labor. Most of the time, for most people, entrepreneurship is latent. It's there, but only in potential. It is the interactions that take place in the market, the sparks of information there, which activate entrepreneurship. The most active entrepreneurs intentionally go to the market in an alert state, methodically seeking arbitrage or other opportunities. They systematically seek prospective differences between revenues and costs in excess of the natural interest rate, taking into consideration price expectations. Some active entrepreneurs just happen to be at the right place at the right time, but afterwards quickly return to latency. So we'll look at this next paragraph. There's sparks of information in the market, and these interactions take place in the market, and it's what attracts the entrepreneurs, the alert entrepreneurs. It activates them. And so but there are different types of entrepreneurs, and people change in how they in their entrepreneurship over time. Sometimes they're active, sometimes they're latent. Some people are more active, some people are more latent. But anyways, the most active entrepreneurs are intentional. They go into the market. They methodically seek arbitrage and other opportunities. They systematically seek differences between revenues and costs in excess of the natural interest rate, and they take into consideration price expectations. And other active entrepreneurs may just have lucked out. They were in the right place at the right time. When that experience, that entrepreneurial adventure, endeavor is over, they're back to latency. They're not really intentionally active all the time. There is some active entrepreneurship that is a response to a gut feeling, and some that comes from systematic calculation. Both are responses to opportunities perceived from the market information. The chances of success yielding a profit rather than a loss are greater when the entrepreneur has systematically examined the possibilities for profit or loss before taking action. So some active entrepreneurship took place as a gut feeling, and some from systematic calculation. And both of those entrepreneurial acts are responses to opportunities that are perceived from the market information. Okay, regardless of whether it comes from relative novices or experienced entrepreneurs, the market process is driven forward by entrepreneurship. Opportunities are sought after and found, as described by Kersner. The entrepreneur's activity is essentially competitive, and this competition is inherent in the nature of the entrepreneurial market process. Or to put it in another way, the other way around, entrepreneurship is inherent in the competitive market process. So the highlights is that the market process is driven forward by entrepreneurship. Entrepreneur's activity is essentially competitive. Entrepreneurship is inherent in the competitive market process. None of this happens in a risk-free world of certainty. In fact, the exact opposite is the reality. What an entrepreneur may discover to be an opportunity may never materialize. What seems like good timing may fail in real time. Or to the contrary, the timing and magnitude and location of an endeavor may indeed satisfy the wants and needs of a consumers significantly more, just as alertly discerned. Profits and losses are regulating forces, and both are inherent in the market. A market that is corrupted by intervention, a market that is uncorrupted by intervention, that is, a free market, allows the entrepreneur to most clearly perceive the signals needed to serve all of our needs. Okay, so none of this happens in a risk-free world of certainty. So you could lose, you could make a profit, you could lose, you could make a loss. There's nothing certain about it. Profits and losses are regulating forces, and both are inherent in the market. A free market allows the entrepreneur to most clearly perceive the signals, and those signals tell them how to serve our needs. So we're about to go into the next section, and so we're down here second from the last. We're at risk, and we'll go and we'll look at, let's see, make sure whoa, what are we doing here? Oh, okay, risk. Risk is an inevitable part of the economy because there is uncertainty and imperfect knowledge. But there are market equilibrating forces that moderate risk. Savings, for one, serves to mollify risk, since savings can be used to meet an immediate need, or it can be directed toward production for the future. If risk is of an actuarial nature, then purchasing insurance will lead to a reduction of risk. So we're going to look at this next section, which is about risk. And there's risk, it's inevitably part of the economy because there's uncertainty and imperfect knowledge. But there are ways to counteract risk. And you could regard those as market equilibrating forces. So savings helps to offset risk, and purchasing insurance is another way of offsetting risk. Entrepreneurs take on the role of major risk takers and relieve others of that burden. Additionally, there is the likelihood that many of the entrepreneurs are skillful and have gained wisdom from their experiences, which skews risk towards success, lessening the degree of risk. For instance, entrepreneurs skillfully calculate economically using market information about relative prices, revenues and costs, and the availability of capital, which adds systemization and discipline to the decision-making process. So we're going to look at the highlights for that. So another thing that reduces risk is the fact that there are entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs take on the role of the major risk takers and relieve others of that burden. And many of the entrepreneurs are skillful and have gained wisdom, and that skews risk towards success. And these skillful entrepreneurs add systemization and discipline to their decision-making process, and that reduces the risk. Finally, the level of charity that a society has reduces risk accordingly. If people care about one another, they will give assistance when the unpredictable leads to misfortune. This lessens the risk for those affected by dire circumstances. So we're talking about risk. And charity is another thing that reduces risk because it gives assistance when the unpredictable leads to misfortune. There is enough uncertainty and risk in the economy without more being created by the interventionists. The claim is made by those who interfere with the economy that they are reducing risk. What that actually means is that they are trying to reduce the risk for some particular favored group. So we're talking about reducing risk, but we're not talking about selectively doing it at the expense of others, increasing the risks of others because you're decreasing the risk of a select group. And so that's what the interventionists do. When they talk about reducing risk by intervening in the economy, interfering in the economy, what that actually means is they're trying to reduce the risk for some particular favored group. These ignorant and ego-driven interventionists do not and cannot fathom all the negative consequences that result from their acts of interference with the market forces. Their disruption of the market process, in and of itself, increases risk for everyone, even the protected and favored groups. Everything becomes riskier in a hampered economy since the flow of knowledge is impeded. So, interventionists, they cannot fathom all the negative consequences of their actions. Their disruption of the market process increases the risk for everyone. Everything becomes riskier because the flow of knowledge is impeded. So we're going to look at the next section, which is disequilibrium, and I'll show you on the canopy the picture of the canopy of the economic concepts in the order transformation quadrant, where now have covered 8, and this is the 9th one. This is disequilibrium. Disequilibrium. The fact that there is always uncertainty and imperfect knowledge implies that the economy is constantly in flux. Errors are inherent but fleeting, or followed by fleeting inherent errors again, and so on, and so on. The equilibrating forces that operate in the market, one of them being entrepreneurship, constantly purge errors. So here we are. We're at this next final section in this quadrant called disequilibrium. The economy is constantly in flux. Errors are followed by fleeting inherent errors again, and so on, and so on. And there's equilibrating forces that operate in the market. And one of them is entrepreneurship. And one of the things that entrepreneurship does is it constantly purges errors. The forces underlying demand and supply move the economy towards equilibrium. Never is the economy in equilibrium, but it is always tending towards it. Disequilibrium, with powerful tendencies towards equilibrium, is the norm. If errors persist and linger, that indicates that the error has become institutionalized and to some degree impermeable to market forces. All institutionalized errors are caused by human intervention and prevent the full expression of the divine potentials of the economy. So we're going to look at the final paragraph in this section on disequilibrium. The economy is never in equilibrium. Disequilibrium, with powerful tendencies towards equilibrium, is the norm. If there are errors that persist, then these errors have been institutionalized and made impermeable to market forces. All institutionalized errors are caused by human intervention, and that prevents the full expression of the divine potential of the economy. So we're going to take a minute here, and you can reflect on what you've been exposed to here in this part of the model, the order transformation quadrant of the divine economy model. We've looked at 9 different concepts and principles. So while you're doing that, I'm going to check to see if anybody's come to the so I haven't seen, there's no comments. Okay, so we're going to go now to another part of this oops. So since we're here, I'm going to take a drink because my throat's getting dry. I appreciate you being here, and I hope that what you're getting exposed to, that you're enjoying it. That was my intention, to make sure that you have something to think about, that you enjoy thinking about, that helps you understand the economy and the world around you better. I'm glad I had a minute here to take a drink, because we're about to go into the section that has to do with the production possibilities frontiers for different concepts in this section. So that's where we are. We're going to pick out one. We're going to pick out one of the principles, concepts, and we're going to look at it in detail. So the one that was selected is savings. So if you look at this canopy of principles, is right there in the middle is savings. So that's the one that we're going to be looking at. And this kind of analysis can be done with any and all of these concepts and principles, but we've just picked out one to show you how that goes, how to do it. So in the order transformation quadrant, we picked the example of savings. Let us examine the difference between human savings and the savings of a squirrel. Apparently, both anticipate the future. The squirrel's action is very strongly driven by instinct. However, if environmental conditions change significantly, the squirrel will modify the size of its cache. Likewise, human savings will be modified as a consequence of conditions. Human intelligence, which can span time conceptually, and which can unravel the numerous and various complexities of the world, enables humans to save purposefully. Simply stated, savings is a productive and vital aspect of life. So here we are, we're looking at this example of a principle, a concept in the order transformation quadrant, and the one we're going to look at is savings. And humans and squirrels save. They both anticipate the future. Human savings also, just like with the squirrel, is modified as a consequence of conditions. Human intelligence enables humans to save purposefully. And so it can be stated simply that savings is a productive and vital aspect of life. Under the current system of economic intervention, the proponents of intervention come to the bizarre conclusion that savings is harmful. For example, Keynesian economics, a variant of which underlies the predominant economic systems practiced worldwide, demonizes people's choice to save. Their forced incentives to diminish savings is like force-feeding the squirrels this year, only to find that their essential cash for the future is completely gone, ultimately leading to disaster. So the summary highlights of that paragraph is that the so-called economists have this bizarre that most of the contemporary people are familiar with. Those economists come to this bizarre conclusion that savings is harmful, and that line of thought is economic. Well, I wouldn't call it economic. That line of thought is called Keynesian economics, and it basically, within that fallacious economic thought, it demonizes people's choice to save, and basically, ultimately, that will lead to disaster. So we're going to look at the next section. And we're going to basically, this is where it's called Order Transformation Quadrant, which is what we're in. And now we're going to look at the Production Possibilities Frontier for that example. So since this example, which is savings and dissavings, is so similar to the one of Consumption Investment Production Possibilities Frontier, used when I introduced the Production Possibilities Frontier concept in Chapter 3, I will select a different principle, different from savings, to use as the example for this quadrant. So let's look at entrepreneurship. See diagram 4H. So here's diagram 4H. This is the entrepreneurship production possibilities frontier. So the two axes are true signals and distorted signals, and there's the no growth point for entrepreneurship. So, there's an interesting thing that happens here. We are talking about savings. That was the example that I picked. So we're in the order transformation quadrant, and we're looking for a production possibilities frontier example. So we were talking about savings, but it turns out that we've already done this production possibilities frontier when in the chapter that we covered production possibilities frontiers. It was actually a major feature of it because it's very similar to the standard production possibilities frontier. So we decided then to do a little bit of a switch and just pick a different principle concept in this quadrant. So if you want to look at that, we can go back and look here. So instead of doing savings, we're going to look at entrepreneurship, the production possibilities frontier of the entrepreneurship concept. So we'll go back now to here. And then what we want to do is go to here. So the no growth point is what we always have to find. The no growth point is where the potential of alertness is offset by distorted signals. As more and more economic signals are distorted, the economy contracts as shown in 4I. So here's 4I, the entrepreneurship contracting economy. So we have distorted signals. As it moves towards distorted signals, you get, over time, you get a contracting economy. So from the highlights for this is that we're trying to identify this no growth point, and that's where the potential of alertness is offset. This entrepreneurial potential of alertness is offset by distorted signals. And when that happens, when the signals are distorted, the economy will contract. And so that's shown here. We've got these distorted signals, and this is this entrepreneurship contracting economy. Over time, the economy is contracting because of the distorted signals. In an expanding economy, the chances of successful entrepreneurship increase because the signals are real, and vice versa. Since the signals are real, the chances of successful entrepreneurship are greater. See diagram 4J. So here we go. The signals are real. They're true signals. So what happens is over time, the entrepreneurship expanding economy, the economy is growing because of that. So what we do is we look here, the summary is because the signals are real, the chances of successful entrepreneurship increase. Okay, so that's what you have. And so when you look at the diagram, these are true signals. The entrepreneurs are alert to the signals. They see the signals they're seeing are true, so they're taking action on them, and because the signals are true and real, they're more likely to be successful. So now we're going to so we've looked at then how that one of the concepts in that quadrant, we've looked at the production possibilities frontier. Now we're going to just summarize the whole quadrant. So the summary of the order transformation quadrant. Born from the womb of the economy are such specializations as division of labor and medium of exchange. Unborn, time seamlessly connects the present and the future economy via the price known as the pure interest rate. Savings, or the supply of loanable funds, is available to be used for economic development by entrepreneurs who see discrepancies in relative prices in the present and over extended periods of time periods. It is discernment of the interactions within the market process that transforms from latent to active each hopeful entrepreneur. Human intervention into the market distorts market signals and causes dire consequences in the present and in the future. These distortions, at least the ones stemming from artificial interest rates, are called malinvestments. So we're going to look at the points, the highlights for this summary of the order transformation quadrant. So some of these things in this concepts and principles that are in this quadrant are born from the womb of the economy, such as division of labor, medium of exchange. Others are unborn, like time, and that's what connects the present and the future economy. But it does that through a price, which was one of the concepts in here known as pure interest rate. And so we also saw that the savings, we talked about savings, and it's the supply of loanable funds, and that's what entrepreneurs use for economic development. They're looking for discrepancies in relative prices in the present and over extended periods of time. And this discernment of the interactions within the market process is what basically converts a latent entrepreneur into an active entrepreneur. And then when there's human intervention into the market, it's distorting the market signals, and that causes dire consequences both in the present and in the future. So what we'll do now is we'll look at the selected exercises. So it is an alternative textbook. More Than Laissez-Faire is an alternative textbook, macroeconomics textbook. So one of the exercises that is asked to be done is then to develop an example. Like we talked about up here, we started off with this example being savings. Once we get we picked one of the principles and we looked at it, and then we also looked at entrepreneurship. So we actually covered two different ones. So you look at it, you discuss an example of one of the concepts or principles in this quadrant. And then once you've discussed it, understood it, described it, then you identify the no growth point actually what this is saying, number 2, is for every one of the concepts you're supposed to go in and identify what is the no growth point. So, but what are the opposing aggregates for that concept or principle? So that'll be an interesting exercise. So we're going to check something out here, see if anybody has come to the Facebook Live. No comments, okay. So what we'll do now is I'm going to give you some time here now to reflect on let's see, we should be reflecting. I think that's right. Yeah, okay. Reflecting on what you've experienced in this audiobook presentation of this episode, and then after a brief time here reflecting, then we'll talk about what's next. And so I'm getting tired here, so anyways, I have a little bit, actually one little small sip left. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sure I'm familiar with the literature, sure you've never seen principles laid out like that and compared relatively to each other, and then put in the context of broader concepts of like order and transformation. And so that would be another thing you could think about, is just because all of these are arbitrarily selected. I selected where they went, all these concepts and principles, where they went in the model. So this is the order transformation quadrant. You could reflect on these principles and concepts and see if you think that would be the best of the four quadrants for them to be in. And then just in terms of within that quadrant, how do they skew more towards the transformation? Do they skew more towards the order? And how are they relative to one another? I guess what's the relationship within that quadrant? What's the relationship between savings and entrepreneurship and monetary theory and disequilibrium? And so there's so much that you can reflect upon. It's endless, fascinating, and definitely so much more vital and alive than the alternative way of looking at economics. So I'm hoping that you're enjoying the divine economy theory and the divine economy model. And so I'm about to sign off. I appreciate you being here, and you can always email me if you have any questions. And so I think that I'm going to say goodnight to you, and I'm so happy that you were here. Thank you so much.